Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of In the Spotlight. I'm Mike Kenichi. Tonight's a very special episode. It's called Tribute to Tules. Of course, longtime Derby assistant baseball coach George DeTullio, 1973 Derby graduate, passed away earlier in the week. And tonight's a tribute in his honor to the impact he's made in Derby sports, especially with Derby baseball. And we have a lot of people who he coached with. Played with. So I'm going to introduce them to you right now. Of course, we have the head coach of that team, John D. Francisco. We have Pete Krasnowski from the 1992 championship team, Joey Guyon also from the 1992 championship team. We have Gary Pompa from the 1996 state championship team. And of course, we have Steve Riles, who coached many years with Tules and was also a member of the 1992 state championship team. So, guys, thank you for coming on today. It's a real honor, and I know Tules impacted a lot of you, so it's going to be a lot of fun tonight. And Riles, we'll start with you because you went to school. You went to school with Tules, correct?
Yeah, I went to high school with George. We both graduated together in 1973, and I had the privilege of catching George DeTullio in his pitching debut when he was a JV baseball player with me in 1972. When he was a pitcher, he got his thumb caught in the clubhouse door on the way to the game and cut his thumb. So I was catching blood balls for the entire game. And Tules didn't want to come out. The umpire kept saying, "What's this?" And I kept saying, "Don't worry about it." And so he ended up pitching the entire game against Shelton over there at Riverview Park. So George and I go way back. We even go back to the days at DHS. So, yeah, it just, I'm just so saddened by that. But by that whole George's passing, he was just a beautiful person, Mike. And he was one of those guys that had a gregarious personality. He was always jovial. He always said what he meant. He wasn't a kind of guy that was going to tell you something and not back it up. He was always there, and there was a real reason why those kids that were on those teams, those gentlemen who were on those teams all those years that George coached with us, why they love him and why he loved them. And it was obvious just from the interaction between the players and everybody that George was just a great friend and a great coach, a great motivator in his own right. And, after George got out of high school, he was playing softball, and he ended up being such a prolific softball player. He was a force to be contended with at Ryan Field with many, many, many home runs. But his coaching days, it were just an absolute pleasure to coach with him and John and all these guys that are on the screen now.
Right. So, John, let me ask you, how did Tules start coaching with you? I mean, how did that all come about?
Well, I knew George in high school because I taught him. He was in my class most of the time because I had to throw him out a few times. But we just struck up a good friendship. And, when I got the job coaching baseball, George is a wealth of knowledge, baseball trivia. George used to ask me questions and I would be embarrassed because I didn't know the answer to them. So finally, he came with me and joined the varsity staff, and he was very, very dedicated, and he came all the time. And Georgie, he worked in the power plant, and he worked the 3 shifts. He worked 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, and he would always, no matter what shift he was working, even the 3 to 11 shift, he wanted to know what was going on, what we were doing. He always took an interest in the kids. And the thing, piggybacking off what Steve said, he was never negative toward a kid. He was always very positive. Like I remember when Donnie was on the mound or Ben was on the mound, there was always, I'd say, "George, get him home." Excuse me. And he talked to him. He said, "Come on, throw strikes, get it in there, get it out." He was just so positive and upbeat. even in losing, and he never thought that he was better than anybody else. And he always thanked me for allowing him to be part of the staff. And I said, that's crazy. He said, well, you have Riles. I remember we used to walk the track 5:30 in the morning. He said, he's really like, I said, yeah, Steve knows a lot about coaching, but that doesn't diminish what you do as a coach. And it's really interesting because here you have a guy who works in a power plant, and I have an attorney. You think like there was a big dichotomy. There wasn't. Steve and George are great friends, and like, I could just tell you stories. Like I give you one story. Steve and I were just talking about maybe taking Ben out of a game. We were talking back and forth. And Steve said, D, you might have enough. Go out and get him. And George, I think, overheard part of the conversation. He walked by and he says, you're not taking Benjamin out of the game, are you? Just like that. And I looked at Riles, and he looked at me. He said, no, we're not taking him out of the game. But what he contributed, coaching first base, he never said, why am I not coaching third? George hit ground balls. George hit fly ball. George hit fly balls. He did anything I asked him to do to the best of his ability. And like Riles said, the kids just gravitated towards him because, he had that kind of personality where he was more like a go-between between coaches and player. And he, they would tell him a lot of stuff, and I would hear from him what it was all about. And I miss him dearly. I was in contact with him when he was in the hospital, and he, I didn't think he was going to pass it as quickly as he did, but I saw him about a month before he really did pass. Like I said, I was walking on Lower Main Street in Ansonia there, and it was this Asian coffee shop, and he says, hey, come on in, have a coffee. And it was him. And we talked for about 45 minutes about different things. It was amazing. It just all came back, all the great memories. But he was just he was a character. He was a good guy. He was dedicated.
Well, D, I'm going to help refresh your recollection a bit.
Go ahead.
You might want to talk about the fact that 15 years earlier, I think, you were coaching with John when you were a freshman baseball. I mean, John, he was coaching with you. George was coaching with you on the freshman program.
Right, he was. And he just came along with me in the JV program and of course, the varsity program. And then after I got out in 96, he coached the year with Ronnie Linnell. And then I think in 97, that kind of was, he had enough. But he, his son played on the team. And, he never said, why isn't my son playing? Why? He wasn't that type of person. He was a great, like I said, he loved to be around the kids. And, I always remember this. My dad always taught, he says, you can't fool kids. They know where you're coming from. You can't lie to kids because they'll see right through you. And he was absolutely right. And George never did that with kids. He was George.
Well,
the kids
John, whenever he drove up in that Corvette of his, immediately the kids would yell out, Tules! All the time. How
about in Portland when we were playing a tournament game in Portland? And he drives up and he gets out of the car. Hey, you big bitches! He's yelling at me. You scared the Portland team. They stopped, and our kids were so happy to see him.
Yeah,
I didn't think he was going to make it, but he did. He was,
every single time. See, it's in those days we didn't have cell phones, so the big thing was the pay phone at the clubhouse. So kids would call him from there. We'd call him from there. Call the phone and ring it, get the score sometimes when he couldn't make a game. And just the fact that he had a sacrifice to switch his shifts, and then with little sleep he would come to games. He'd you could tell
yeah.
that he was just pushing it, and he always pushed it for the team.
Yeah.
And, all the time, he was always pushing it for the team, and he was always, challenging kids to play better. Always.
Yeah.
And he
But
challenged
look what he
us.
did with
Now he's going
Gary.
to challenge us.
With Gary in '96, half the time Gary would play shortstop, half the time he'd play center field, because we didn't have a lot of infielders who could play it. So Gary says, well, I can play short. So you said, Gary, right? I used to fungo to you. You used to run down after school fungo. So Tules said, geez, the kid can catch. I said, yeah, he can catch. And he remembers remember the game in West Haven where you speared the line drive and doubled the kid off first.
Yeah.
And the game. Tules always remembered that. And then, he played center field when other people, when what's name came into pitching. It was phony, it was just unbelievable. And George said, just unbelievable what he did for the team. And then when Joey G got the big hit in '92, it was Tules. Tules said, he's going to get a hit. Yeah, sure he is. Okay, yeah. And he rips the shot, and he turns around, he grabs it. I told you, you don't believe. I said, believe. I believe. He was just that kind of person.
Right. So, Joey, let me ask you, because, you got to play for Tules. You had Jocko with the JV. So, you had some great personalities as far as coaches went. But just talk about, because I always heard from people I talked to that Tules was the type of coach that he could sometimes be that friend you needed when you were having a tough time. He could pat you on the back. He could encourage you. So just talk about the impact he made on you and so many other players.
When I think about Tules, he was absolutely that kind of guy that fit in between the coaching staff and the players. Mike, you gave me the heads up that he passed, and immediately you start thinking about what they meant to you. And I can't remember a thing that he taught me about baseball, but I can remember how he made me feel as a person. That optimism. D was right when Tules says to D, "Hey, I don't know, I didn't have a hit in that game. I don't even think I had a hit in the tournament." And here we are, in my fifth or sixth at bat in the championship game, and and I didn't even know this story, D. But for Tules to turn to you and say he's going to get a hit, it went that bat went on for a long time, and it started with 2 strikes. So D, I would have put my money with you to say it's not going to work out. But Tules was that guy. Tules was that guy that he would turn to us and lift our spirits. I think that he was, clearly he was a tough guy. I think he liked guys like Dave Van Roman a lot because Dave was a football player who was an excellent athlete, could also contribute on the baseball field. I was primarily a baseball player. I tried football for 2 years in high school, but I never felt any different, that he treated us any different. He cared about our team. And when I look now in my adulthood, the amount of sacrifice that I've made, which pales in comparison to Tules and the two that are here. But when I coach my daughter's team, I've coached a lot of games, and I've coached a lot of first base because I don't want to stand over at third. I don't want to have those responsibilities. And I think back and reflect on the type of coach that I hoped I was out there with my daughter and her teammates, and that go between, pick them up. The coaches are someone's making a lineup. Someone's got to make that hard decision. It never had to be Tules. He could have a say. But he would put his arm around you and say, "Hey, you got the next one. Don't worry about that error." Whatever it was, he was great at lifting us up. Before we got on the air, we were talking about his uniform. He wore this red jacket because he didn't have a uniform shirt, maybe that fit, and he wore this stretched out wristband. And that's immediately, Mike, what I thought of when you sent me the note to say that Tules passed. I thought of that red jacket and that wristband, and that will live on in my memory. And again, I would just say it wasn't about the X's and O's. It wasn't about the strategy of the game. It was about how he made us all feel. and the commitment that he made, the sacrifices he made. We beat Cheshire to qualify for the States. He wasn't there. And as I remembered, it was a mad rush to get to that payphone to give him a call. And my guess is it was probably Pete. But if I could remember it correctly, Tules probably said, we won, right? Something like that. Not how did we do? Because he had this optimism for us as a team that really kept our spirits high and our confidence high.
Right. So, Gary, let me ask you, because the 1996 team, there weren't really a lot of expectations. I think you guys might have started 0-4 or 0-5, and you guys really came on. And I mean, just talk about having his presence there, because I know for kids, I'll use Kevin Mittendorf and Sean Bittman, Sean Hayden, who were first-time starters that year, who were probably a little nervous. I'm sure a guy like him really relaxed them when they played.
Yeah, Tules was amazing. Tules has had a tremendous presence to the Derby baseball program. Tules, he was a big guy with a big voice and an even bigger heart. I think that's the way I could summarize Tules. Tules had this very unique ability to find what motivated each individual athlete. And he used that as his tool to get the absolute best out of each and every one of us. And that's what he did. That's what he did day in and day out, throughout the entire season. Yeah, we did not start off well. We didn't expect to go 10-10 that year. We weren't expected to go 10-10 that year to get into the tournament. And having his presence there was a tremendous help. Tules was electric. And everybody that spoke touched on this. When he pulled up, we went nuts. I mean, we loved him. We loved that man, and that man loved us. And I learned more about, I think I can speak for everyone, I learned more about dedication and hard work from Tules without him ever having to say a word. Mm-hmm. Because, and Riles, you spoke to this and you put it very, very nicely in your narrative on Facebook. His work schedule did not afford him the ability to be at every practice or at every game. So when he was there, we knew that he likely had to swap a shift with a coworker.
Right.
Or he had just worked his own shift, which allowed him, more likely than not, little to no sleep. So his dedication to the kids and to the program was unwavering. So just watching that, he was just a walking inspiration to us, for us to do better and for us to make the tournament and then get into the tournament, win those 5 games, bang out a championship. His presence was just unbelievable.
Yeah, he was never intimidated by anybody on another team or another coaching staff. I could tell you that much. But one thing I remember is the time that David Ann Roman had left his bat at home plate, and George laid into him for just leaving it there. He's like, "Who do you think's going to pick that up?" Me? He goes, "Who's going to pick it up?" And he said, "I'll tell you what. If you get a home run, I'll pick up that bat." And I remember we were down in Brantford, and there was this little fence that curved out in left field, and David hit it over that fence, and he gets to home plate, and he snaps his fingers, and he points at George and points to the bat. And Tules walked down from his first base coaching box and just said he was beaming that he had the chance to pick that bat up for him. He was so happy for David that he got that home run.
Yeah. And a man of his word. That's the kind of guy
he was. That's the kind of guy he was.
Yeah. Right. Joey, let me ask you. I mean, it's hard to honestly tell you what you were thinking when you hit that home run as you're rounding the bases. But was there a part of you that was thinking, I can't wait to tell Tules? I mean, there had to be so many emotions when you were rounding that base.
Mike, that was Dave and Roman's home run.
Now I'm talking about when you hit the home run to put them in the tournament against
Cheshire. Yeah,
because Tules wasn't there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm going to tell everyone my secret. I was usually guessing. I mean, I never really figured out the game. I thought he'd throw me a pitch that I could hit, and so I put a swing on it. I wish I was more talented than that. It was the only home run I ever hit. Thank God that fence is short. And I think the outfielder was
That was
so dead.
way out.
Yeah, well, I never saw it. I hit it and ran. But the pictures that were taken, the outfielder ran right into the fence.
Yeah.
So, Mike, when I think about, I felt like I squared it up. But again, having never hit a home run, I didn't know what that felt like. So I hit it. I felt like I hit it well. I thought I hit it into the gap. And I was just running for first base. And when I took the turn, I saw the outfielder on the ground, and that second base umpire, that infield umpire, put his finger up and circled it around. And I felt like a feather. And I'll tell you this, I couldn't wait to get to third, to hit Riles, and even more so to just get down to home plate. There's still a few pictures. Riles' wife did a great job of taking tons of pictures for us. And it feels like it just happened the other day. But you run into home, your first home run, and we qualified for states. Not only that, we left Cheshire on the field. The year before, Cheshire left us on the field, and boy, was that heartbreaking. I was not much of a contributor at my junior year, but we walked off that field in Cheshire really just stunned. And then we went on that junior year. The team went on to get knocked out of the state tournament out in the middle of nowhere. I felt like, we almost fought the team or the parents or the something. We get on the bus, just a terrible feeling. So to have that all turn around for us to qualify, hit our 10th game with a home run against Cheshire, just outstanding. I mean, it's one of those memories that will stay with you. It gives you a little bit of confidence, and and I think that it worked out great. I think D has a story. At least Riles wrote the story about Gino's rec specs came off in that melee at home plate, and D was no fan of those rec specs. And
that's for sure.
They met their demise that day.
Yeah.
Well, I remember George couldn't believe that he broke them.
Just ripped them in half.
We were telling George that after the game, then after the next day when we saw him, we were telling George, we were saying, hey, D destroyed Gino's goggles, and George just gave him a look, like shake his head, like, okay. Yeah. It's like, we got rid of the goggles finally, but I can remember a game where George we had playing Cawkenchog in a quarterfinal game down at Hamden High School. And
yes.
I'm standing in the dugout. George is pacing up and down. We're ready to play the game. It was 1995. And I don't know, Gary, if you remember, you were a junior back then. But so George comes up to me and he goes, I can't believe this. Why aren't you not nervous? And I said, George, what makes you think I'm not nervous? I said, and he goes, you don't look nervous. I go, yeah, that's the face I'm putting on. I go, but I'm just as worried as everybody else, and he's like, but he was like one of those guys that you always wanted him in your dugout.
Yeah.
You always wanted George in your dugout. You always wanted him on your side. I always fretted. I always said to myself, I don't know what I would do if this guy was coaching the other team.
Yeah.
It's like you'd really be worried about winning any game. And that's how much of a motivator he was on the kids.
Right.
He challenged everybody to be better. Even if a kid got up and he hadn't batted. I remember he was challenging Carlos Ortiz to get a hit in the game. I mean, he was, when Carlos finally got in a tournament game, we were up there in the second round. I think it was up in we were playing against North Stonington or something, or Wheeler, and we were actually playing at Hand of Madison.
Yeah,
and Wheeler. A couple of kids, we had beaten them so badly that, a lot of guys got in the game at the end, and George was challenging them to get hits. I mean, he wasn't letting anybody off the hook. He was gonna motivate you, whether you were the number 9 hitter on the team or a guy on the bench, or you were the star. He was just gonna do it, and you knew it was coming, and it was like just a pleasure to do it. And when you look back on it, you just realize the heart, as Gary said, the amount of heart that he had. It just that's why I'm so sad that he passed. He's one of those men that you wish you had that one more time to talk to.
Yeah.
You know, to talk about the past or to talk about how he was doing. You know, it's one of those things that, you know, he was that kind of person that you would always want to go back and you wish you had that conversation. And, you know, and he didn't get the credit, you know, from as much as he deserved. Like, he was such an unassuming guy. He would tell me all the time,
Oh, yeah.
you know, you don't really need me, or you don't. I said, wait a minute. I said, George, there's 3 parts to this thing. I used to tell him as our coaches. I go, I'm just the teacher. I go, you're the motivator, and D, he's the father figure. He's got to do everything, and he's the disciplinarian. He's got to do it. We don't have to. So you got to have that part of making that combination of people. And that's why I said, without George, we don't win that tournament. We don't. I don't know. You know, 96. I'm sure it's the same. Without that guy there, you don't win. I mean, you know, because he was that much a part of what we were able to accomplish, and what John and the players and all the players. And like you said, it's just, you know, whenever I see a Corvette Stingray now, Mike, I'm going to be thinking of George. Driving up, and I'm going to be thinking of Tules. Like, every time I see a Corvette, or every time, even when I go by that batting cage up at Ryan, like, we used to be able to, batting cage was up on top. And sometimes George would drive his Corvette up to the top because he would be, you know, on his way back from work, and he would park it up next to that old batting cage near the Little League field. And George used to literally drive right up, and there it is. All the players, no matter what was happening, they were going like, Tules, he's here. You know, we're back in order. Like, the world has a certain order to it, and it was back in that order whenever he showed up.
Yeah,
Right.
Riles, you talk about what Tules does. It's really easy to get tight really fast under pressure.
Oh, yeah.
And he had that gift of loosening you up.
Yeah.
You know, I think he would say something like, "Have a game, you big bitch." Like, he had a way of just putting smiles on faces and just reminding you that it's just a game. Get out there, trust it, and have some fun.
Right. Well, we have Pete back. Pete had a little situation, but he's back. So, Pete, just talk about the motivator that Tules was, because, like Steve mentioned earlier, Coach D had to be more of the disciplinarian. He was the head coach. In football, D got to be what Tules was. But in baseball, it was strictly Tules. He was the motivator. Just talk about the impact he had on you guys.
Yeah, I mean, Tules, I agree. Once again, I'm not sure what I missed. Some of the stuff that, you know, you need that 3-headed monster. And, you know, you had D, who was, you know, the figurehead, the one that was going to lay down the law. And you had Riles, who was more the instructional type thing. And, you know, D would be out there arguing for us for stuff. And then Tules, once again, as I heard the end of it, is the motivator. And one of his biggest skills, like what Joe had said, that quote, I mean, I have that in my head a million times. Whether it was show me something or you big. And but he also had a way to, you know, I'll tell you just a personal thing about motivating, but he also had a way to also put you back in reality and not let you get too big too. He was very honest about stuff. A thing I will always remember to me is that, you know, being leadoff hitter, we'd have our little huddle before the game would start, whether it's to go out in the field or if we're hitting first. But if we were out in the field first, when we came back, we would still huddle right before that. And we'd all put our hands in together and, like, you know, whatever was hits or whatever we would say. And then Tules, as he's walking away, I'd make eye contact and find him. And he'd be like, you know, PC, see you at 90. And that was the thing, like, you need to be here on first base. And and it became every game. That was our little thing. And it was my motivation. And I remember being, you know, going into the state championship game, and I think we had won 7 of our last 8. I can't remember. Maybe we lost after Cheshire, but we had a lot going in. And I think every first inning I was on first base, whether hit by pitch or like infield hit or something. And except for the one game I didn't, we lost. So I was like feeling very nervous inside going into the championship game. Like, if I don't get on first base, basically, like, we're going to lose. Like, we were very superstitious by that point. And I remember him just saying to me, he goes, you know what I'm going to say. You know where you need to be. And, like, he didn't say his usual thing. I'm like, oh, God, now he just said something different. He wasn't his exact thing.
No.
And I remember walking in the first inning, like, oh, thank God when I got there. And I told him the story. He goes, well, you only hit singles anyways, and little bouncers up the middle. Like, oh my God. You know, like I was lucky to get on first base. So he had a way of doing that to kind of, motivate you, but also not let you get too big.
Right.
If you hit a double, it's like, well, you only hit little seeing eye singles all the time. So it's about time you hit one.
Right. Gary, let me ask you, you guys made it look so easy in the tournament in 96, but I'm sure it wasn't. But I mean, having a guy like Tules in that dugout on that bench and then, at coaching first base, he probably kept you guys loose all the time, I would imagine, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Kept us loose all year long. But we struggled. We got in 10-10, and you're playing Cheshire, you're playing West Haven, Sheehan, you're playing these schools, and then you get in, and we're playing other Class S schools, and once you get in, and it becomes a little bit easier. But Pete said it very well. He kind of puts you back in check a little bit. Don't rest on your laurels. But he does. He kept us very, very loose throughout the tournament. Kept that same flow going that he kept throughout the year, which was really, really nice. So it kind of kept the anxiety level down at an even keel. So he was a great guy to have around, all year and all throughout the tournament.
Right. And what was the feeling like, Gary? I mean, obviously you win a state title. That's an unbelievable feeling.
Yeah.
But just being able to celebrate with people you really looked up to and admired. I mean, just being able to have a championship and win it with coaches like Coach D, Coach Tules, that had to be so gratifying.
Yeah. Oh, it was tremendous. I was a football player, and it was a disappointing season, and a lot of us were multi-sport athletes. And our football season that year we went 3-7. So coming off of that, there's expectations for baseball season. So being able to celebrate, with the state championship with coaches that put in that type of dedication and players who put in that type of dedication, it's a tremendous, tremendous feeling, especially in a city like Derby, where there's that type of emphasis on sports and that type of tradition. It's unbelievable. It's the best feeling.
Right. John, let me ask you, in times like, I know there was one game in the tournament, a runner got picked off, and I know that's never easy for somebody to go through that. I mean, I got to believe, though, that Tules said the right things to that player to kind of relax him and let him know, we're going to pick you up and we're going to get this back.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you who was Angelo Deruba. When Angelo was
you just sold him right out, D. Thanks.
When he was running towards me, I was going to choke him to death. Tules stopped me, and he says, "It's my fault. I didn't get him back in time."
There's no 7-second delay on this, D.
Beautiful, Tules. Way to go. Good job. But no, I remember in 96, we ended up 10-10. We got in. We got beat. Gary will remember this. In 96, we got beat in our last game by Sheehan, who was pretty bad. I remember walking up to the coach's room, and the kids were sitting there waiting for us to come in. And Tules says, "What are we going to do now? We got beat by Sheehan. How we?" It's Tules, relax. Just relax. All right. It's all right. It's better to be 10-10 than 11-9. But anyway, he says, "What are you going to say to the kids?" And I walked in there and I just said, "Look, these other teams in the S, they don't play Cheshire. They don't play like Shelton. They don't play big schools like West Haven. They don't do it. Are we going to worry about Shepherd Valley? We going to worry about Griswold? We going to worry? No." I says, "That's the difference. You made to be championships, and we're going to win this whole thing." And I think if Gary stops and think about that, that's true. I said, anything less than winning the whole thing, we failed. I failed. And Tules just took it to heart. We got out, the kids left, and they left like on a good note. And then we went in there, and he said, Are you crazy? He says, we're 10-10. We're going to be ranked like 26. He said, I don't care if we're ranked 28. We're going to win this whole thing. You better believe it. If you don't believe it, don't come. And he said, what do you mean don't come? I'm gonna be here. I'll be here on time. So he was just more than a friend. He was just.
Well, you know what,
cool.
John? One of the things that the players aren't aware of, George knew, and this is something, George his job, he knew his job was to be the motivator, right?
Yeah.
But what the players don't know is that after every practice, after every game, it's John, me, and George in that coach's room.
Yep.
Talking about what we could do to make players better and make us win. So George was an integral part of those discussions. George knew the game.
Yes.
It wasn't like he was just there motivating and he didn't really know what he was talking about. George knew the game very well. So when we were in the coach's room, that's when he would then either disagree with me or disagree with John at times and come up with his own ideas about what he thought should happen or how we should go about or what we should do in practice. So we all knew our roles, and George was good at that. He knew I wasn't going to be able to do it because I was too busy doing all this other stuff or what we were doing. And that's why I always said to George, when we sat down many, times on the bench, and I'd say, because George wouldn't take credit for it. And I said, you're one of those three cogs. I mean, it's like you're just as important as me or John or anybody else. Mm-hmm. And, that's what the players knew that. But, is he was that kind of person that he didn't want to take that kind of credit. You know what I mean? But you guys wouldn't always know this, is that he was in the coach's room all the time. And we would talk about every part and aspect of the game. It's just that he knew his role when the game started or the practice started. He knew what he was supposed to do because, we learned early on that the worst thing coaches can do is argue with each other in front of the players. That you guys would think, we don't know what we're talking about. Look, we're just arguing away. So those discussions were never had on the field. They were always had in the clubhouse. And so, I want you guys to know that George, he knew the X and O's of the game. He didn't, your memories could be more of the feeling and the motivation because he knew that was his role.
Yeah. It wasn't lost on us, I think. I mean, I remember he fed, to be honest, we were a bunch of big babies. We used to hit inside in the gym until like May because our hands would hurt. And Tules, a lot of times, if we were thrown outside, but Tules would get stuck on the nice days, he'd be feeding the machine over on the cage over at the end. Yep. And he would not let you get out until he was happy with your round. It was like, pick him up and give me more. And then, so he was like, and he would be like the sound. He would talk about the sound off your bat. So it wasn't like he was just, in the games, like rah stuff. I remember a lot of times, like, no, Chris, that was a horrible bucket. Go pick him up again. Like, and he wouldn't let you get out. Yeah. And then he always had a, like, turn into a motivation. Like, we like to hit and get our swings in. Yeah. And he would try to feed him at the end, like the last 10 as quick as you could go, like speed around. And it was his goal to make sure we missed at least one. So we put him in like right one after another to make sure that he got one by us. And like, he came out on top. Yeah. But he actually did a lot where hitting, where you didn't realize it. Like, he made you like think to yourself, like, was that a good swing? Where should you hit that pitch? Because he would leave the machine loose and kind of moving around. So it wasn't all coming down the middle, So he did do a lot on the coaching side too.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So Joey, let me ask you, I mean, is there one memory of Tules that stands out to you above all the others? I mean, do you have one particular one that really kind of stands out?
Well, I mean, it's his absence in that Cheshire game. That's the part that I just when I listen to that dedication, when I read the book and learned more about the sacrifice that Tules was making, I think about the commodity that we all crave and we can't hold on to is time. And so the amount of sacrifice that he made, I don't think that I wasn't carrying that with me in real time. I reflect back on that now, and it makes that that journey even more special. And so if I were Tules, I probably would have said, you know what, I have to manage my requests or my swaps, and I'm not going to. Maybe the Cheshire game's not the one. I'm gonna book it so that I can be there for the next one when they clinch, because Cheshire was supposed to beat us. They're really good.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that he was waiting by the phone and waiting by the phone and waiting by the phone, you know, mapping it out in his head, saying, well, we should be almost done. We should be almost done. I should be getting a call any minute now. As I reflect on that, it's, you know, the other thing that he had Pete knows this. He used to talk about his Pepe's Pizza order.
8655762.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Pete. Pete doesn't forget anything. It's ridiculous.
He said that to me for years. And I'm like, and it was in my head, and I don't know why I should know. Of course, it was before he had 860, so it was just 203. And be like, Tules, what do you have for dinner tonight? And he would say that. And I just checked yesterday. That is the number. And I'm like, I still remember because of what Tules used to say.
So you talk about Pepe's Pizza all the time. Pete and I spend a lot of time together, and Pete, I'm telling you, man, Pete has a steel trap for a memory. And when we're together, we could talk all night long, but when we're together, he just remembers every aspect of what's going on. And so for anyone out there that is near and dear and a loved one to Tules, I want you to know that this is no reflection on Tules and the impact that he made on all of us, and particularly on me. I don't remember a lot of details, but I know that he loved us. I know that he cared. He sacrificed for us. And Mike, when I think about if any of the three coaches needed to get me through a dark alley, I'm going with Tules. You know, because he was a tough guy, and and he had our respect in a very soft and gentle way. But we're talking about that Portland game. We went up to Portland. I mean, shoot, D had us there like 4 hours early so we could take their field. That was a thing that we like to do, is show up, and steal their field. We're out there, we're practicing. They're still in school. But when Tules shows up, Portland's already there out on the field, and they get to see this burly, big voice man showing up and going, not only did they take our field, but they have him too. He was a great dude and tough as nails.
Right.
But he had a soft side, you know, it's and by the way, his favorite pizza was large bacon and onion smothered in garlic. That was what he would say.
Smothered in garlic.
You know, that tough side, you know, I said, if you mind saying, if my favorite thing to remember about, and I had shared this with Nietzsche in the text, I'm sure I've told to Joe, is, you know, obviously he made those sacrifices and sometimes switching, and we might have had a Saturday afternoon game or something. And, you know, he had the two small kids at the time with his first wife. And I think it was Kevin. I think it was Kevin. He might have been 8 or 9 years old, somewhere in that range. And Colleen, his little daughter, with the cutest little thing, was like up to his knee. And I remember his then wife would bring them, and after a game, and she would come running up to him and like grab him around the knee. And be like, I love you, Daddy. And he would just look down his big burly, you know, boy's like, oh, I love you too, sweetie. And I was a 17-year-old kid, and that made such an impression on me. Like, wow, like someday I hope that, you know, I have a little daughter that will do that. And that's something I'll never forget that. Like, I don't know if it was, you know, it was like, I think it was like a Saturday morning game or something. We must have had a rain out from a Friday. And that will always stick with me, seeing this big, huge guy just suddenly melt when his daughter came running up to him. And I was like, okay.
Right.
That's what I'll always remember about Tules too.
Right.
One thought I want to make a point of. Gary, when he was in high school, he got himself into a little trouble a lot of times. So Tules would be so mad at Gary. You know, he said to me one time, you just want me to flat out beat him up. I said, no, George. Talk to him. So when Gary used to get on the bus, Tules was there. Gary was right behind him. He wasn't sitting in the back. He was sitting behind
I had to sit in the front next to Mr. Mancini and Tules.
I
couldn't sit with anybody else. I wasn't allowed.
Then Gary would say, "Well, can I go over there?" He says, "Just stay where you are, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, boy, just stay where you are." So, he, but and Gary didn't mind it because
No.
he knew that Tules meant business.
Just
But
remember.
there's no words that I could.
Yeah.
I can't put into words like what he was to me, what he was to Steve, what he was to the kids. He just was Tules. I mean, that's it. He was a man that you loved. You won't forget him. I'll never forget him for sure. And I remember just when I used to see him after I was done coaching, he would always stop and always, your money's no good here. I'm buying. That's it. And he was just, that's the kind of man he was. That's the kind of man I'll remember him as. But,
right. And Gary, is there any particular memory that stands out to you more than anything else about Tules?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was thinking about this all day since we talked earlier, Mike. And it's tough when you spend so much time, so many years with these men, your coaches. Pick one memory out of arguably hundreds, thousands, but there's one very personal moment that I had with Tules that I will never forget. So I came up with the condensed version of it. So D and Riles, it seems like a lifetime ago. My sophomore year, 94, D gave me the opportunity to start varsity. I didn't bat that year, but I started. Now, the obstacle as I saw it was that the opportunity was left field. That was the position. Now, being a middle infielder my entire life, going back to my T-ball days, it was somewhat of a challenge for me. It was somewhat of a bit of a transition. So it was the first few games of the year. It was a home game. For some reason, I have Sheehan in my mind. I can't recall exactly, but there were runners on base. There was a very, very routine fly ball hit to me. I learned very, very quickly that there's a significant difference between catching an infield fly and catching a fly ball in the outfield. Steve Tilke was playing center field. Kenny Cronk was in right. That was his senior year. Steve Tilke was screaming on the top of his lungs back. As I saw the ball off the bat, I wasn't moving. I swore that ball was coming straight at me. As the ball got closer to me, I realized it was over my head and it was slowly going toward the foul line. So I started sprinting toward the ball, and I realized that when I got toward the ball, I had to dive to catch it. So I dove, and I caught the ball. I don't know how, and it wasn't pretty, but I caught the ball. It was ugly. So I turned a very, very routine play into a very difficult play. So the inning ended, and I'm jogging back, and it's a very lonely jog back to the dugout after you botch a routine fly ball like that. So as I'm jogging back to the dugout, I'm praying that D and Riles and Tules and Jeff Davis think that I made this fabulous play when in reality I botched a fly ball. That didn't happen. So I get back to the dugout and I hear this big burly voice yell, "Umps." So I go over and it's Tules. And he puts his right hand on my shoulder, and he looks me right in the face and he says to me, "It was a nice dive. It's a nice dive, a nice catch." He said, "Did you do that on purpose, or were you trying to make the ESPN highlight reel?" And I'll never forget that. And he said to me, "Relax out there. Your first step is always back. You're going to be fine." I bring that story up, Mike, because that epitomizes Tules. He understood that I was outside of my comfort zone. And he knew that he had to bring me back down a little bit. He knew he had to realign the planets for me before I went out there the next inning. And nobody knows the tail end of that story. I've never told anybody that. but he knew that having that little chat with me and adding that little bit of levity to that conversation was going to bring me back up. And again, that wasn't something that he did in front of a group of teammates or coaches. And again, like I said, nobody knows about that, but it's those personal conversations that I'll never forget that story. That was 1994. I was a sophomore in high school.
Yeah.
So that's who he was. And I will never, ever forget that.
Well, that's a great story. It really is. And I'm sure there's thousands of those stories that are similar. Steve, I mean, you went to school with him. So, I mean, you've known the guy for over 50 some odd years. I mean, just talk about what he meant to you as a friend.
Well, George is I was in high school, I wasn't a football player, I was just a baseball player. And so George was more aligned with the non-football players. He had a group of friends that I grew up with in grammar school and in the middle school and so on. And so playing with George was fun because George had this gregariousness about him. He was on the JV team with me, and he was actually a fun kid, but he wanted to win. Like, he was like one of those kids that wanted to win. He was competitive. He was a very competitive kid. But, the thing that I remember is when I used to sit down with him in the dugout. I remember one time, and I think I mentioned that on Facebook, is I sat down with him one time in the dugout. He came up to me and he sat down next to me and he said, look at the different paths we took, because we lost touch for a while because I went off to college and I didn't know where George went off to, you know what I mean? It's like I lost touch with him. And then so I told him, I said, George, it doesn't matter. I said, look at what we are now here right now. So whatever paths we took to get here is what was meant to be, and we're meant to both together try to win and help these kids become men and win. And so that's the thing that I always enjoyed talking to George about life. Because sometimes I'd come out of the courthouse at Derby, I'd be working at the courthouse, and George would be down talking to, Mr. Lanzeri down there at his hot dog stand, and just to talk to people. So I'd come out and I'd see him down there, and we'd talk for like an hour. I didn't care what was going on at the office. You know what I mean? It's like George was that kind of guy that can grab your attention and talk to you for a long time. And he had, I can say this much. He had a lot of people that had nothing to do with baseball that really liked the guy. He was loved by a lot of people, and he still is, but he didn't have an easy life. I knew that he had struggles, and I was like, okay, but he fought those. And see, that's why I always admired George, because he came out of the troubles as a stronger person. And as a better person. As he got older, he actually got to be better and better and better. And as we live life, our goal is to keep on maturing. And George, he did that. He just kept on. And that's why it didn't matter that we would go off in separate ways for a while. When we got back to talking again, it would start off talking about Derby baseball was primarily it, but also about life. So he was that kind of guy that could bring you back to reality a lot of time. I mean, I knew one thing for sure. When I talked to George, I was going to get the straight stuff of what he felt. You know how you talk to people sometimes and they just give you a story or a song and a dance? You didn't get that out of George. George told you knew exactly where it came from his heart or from what he was feeling at that moment. And that's why you love the guy so much. And I love the guy to death because he was that kind of an impactful person upon everybody that came across him. And I was just very, very fortunate to have gotten to know him better after high school. Lost touch for a while to get back into, knowing him in baseball at Derby High. I just feel so blessed that I was able to be his friend.
Right. John, let me ask you, John. I mean, you've known the guy practically his whole life. I mean, you guys walked the track, all that stuff. What did he mean to you as a friend? Never mind a coach.
I'm just gonna leave you with to know him was to love him, and he was probably. Probably have about 4 very, very close friends. Riles is one, and I would trust Riles with my kids. George is another one. I would trust George with my life because I know that those 2 guys would do anything for me as I would try to do anything for them. But I would remember George said to me after the 92 championship season, where we were all alone, we're walking out of the Peter, where was that place? I can't remember. We had the
Tailgaters.
I think it was Evergreen or whatever.
It was Evergreen then. Yeah.
Evergreen then.
Whatever it was. We were like kind of walking out together. And he said, I just want to tell you this. Thank you. I said, for what? Thank you for giving me a chance when there were a lot of people who wouldn't give me one. And I remember like tears welled up in my eyes, tears welled up in his eyes. He says, I can't thank you and Riles enough to have enough faith in me to deal with kids and to trust me to deal with kids. I said, well, let me tell you what, Tules, you were in that trust. And ever since that day, we never had I don't think Steve, George and I ever had a crossword. I don't think we ever had an argument. We might have had an argument between what was the difference between a sacrifice butt and a suicide squeeze. Remember that, Ralph? We were arguing about that, and I said, okay, you guys figure it out. I'm going home. But he just was, to know him was to love him. I mean, I loved the guy. I loved him.
Was his first coaching gig like with us? Did he ever coach before?
No. He coached with John as a freshman. When John was a freshman coach, he coached with him and Russ Scovin.
Oh, so that was in the late 70s then, right?
Yeah.
But he didn't coach from then for like 10 years, right? Or 10, 12 years after that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you think about that, I mean, this is someone who, because he started our junior year or sophomore year. I think he came back in 90 or 90. It was either 91. I think in 90. He was definitely in 91. And, it was like when he stepped in when Riles had to take a leave and we had all the other guys come help out. This is someone who at that time probably had a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old. Hadn't coached in 12 years.
Yeah.
And he's in his mid-30s. And he commits to help that. I mean, that's what legends are. I mean, I coached and like you guys started too, like when you're young, you don't have kids, family and you're 20. This is someone who steps into a full-time like high school coaching on a competitive level and gives up that. I mean, that is just I remember leaving coaching when I was starting a family. This is someone who jumps in with both feet and at that point in his life to help out.
Well, 91 was a tough year if you remember.
Right.
Joey and Pete remember because
I mean,
kids and Tules was always the buffer between. I mean, we won a lot of games that year. I don't know how we did it because half the team didn't talk to the other half of the team.
Yeah,
you guys never
it was
together.
Tough.
It was tough. We got to. I think we lost in the semifinals.
Yeah, we did.
Quarterfinals, whatever, and on a pitch that was a strike that Donnie threw and they called it a ball. I went ballistic. But anyways, after that, and then I remember you, Peter, went to Coach Riles. You went to Riles. You said, you coming back next year? And Steve said, I'll be back. Remember? Then you told me Steve's coming back. So I said, hallelujah, we got this.
But I mean, but Tules was there and it was a big year. It was a tough year after. I mean, your dad passing, and stuff like that. And you had not just him, but you had guys like New and Lucarelli and Knopfs, and those guys stepped up. I mean, and helped us a lot because you were going through a lot. And we were basically fighting amongst ourselves every other game.
Right.
And Tules was the one common person that, at different days, we all could have been pissed off at various coaches, various reasons. no one ever got mad at Tules because how could you? He was basically something that kind of was a glue that was holding it together, and we were hanging by a thread that year.
Yeah, we were. As a matter of fact, after the 91 season, I said to Tules, I said, this has been harrowing. It's been crazy. I don't know if I could do this anymore. And then Ralph said he was coming back, so I stayed with it. But it was Tules was the buffer there. I know. Yeah, I would have never won anything. But I'm just so happy that in my lifetime, I got to know an individual like Tules. I'm an educator. I went to college. Ralph went to college. And yet I can consider him one of my best friends. Just like Nietzsche. I mean, Mike and I are very close. I had him as a student. I had him on freshman. I had him
Mike went to college,
team.
Joe John.
Yeah, he did. He didn't play football on the varsity, and he was very upset about that. And I got him to play on the JVs, and he did very, very well. But that struck up a friendship that has lasted till now, right, Nietzsche?
Yeah, definitely.
Of course, the Yankees is the go-between. We both love the Yankees.
Well, I don't want to talk about them right now because
George
will get me upset.
Tules was a big Yankee fan too, though.
He was.
Oh, yeah. Big Yankee fan.
Tules was a big Yankee fan.
Yeah. We sit there and say, who played shortstop in 1963? I can't even remember what happened yesterday. He knew a lot of trivia.
Yeah.
So, Gary, let me ask you before I'm going to ask each person this, but before we go, what would you say to his family if there was something they didn't know about him that you could tell them? What would you tell them?
I would tell them that if they didn't know this already, and I used this word before, that his unwavering dedication was something that I've never seen before from anyone. That what he did for the kids in the Derby program was really just beyond I think what would be expected from any coach.
Right. And Joe, what would you say if there was one thing?
Yeah, I want to thank the family for sharing him with us. And he taught me how to be a man, how to be a man of character. And he really left that legacy of giving back to the community. It's hard to truly understand how important people are. And, a day like today is reflection. And when I reflect on the sacrifices he made to teach us how to be good men, I say thank you to his family.
Pete?
Joe stole my first line about the sharing. I mean, I was thinking about that all day. And, to reiterate that and then add, more, it's the same thing, it's unfortunately you wait till these things where it's too late to say, but, same thing I would say to Mrs. Riles and Mrs. D and Jess and Jen and his kids is that thank you for sharing them with us because it's hard. They give up a lot of their time with their families. And, I know they don't want to. Nobody wants to leave home. I mean, I like spending time with my family. I'm sure like everybody does. And to do that. And, like I said, you don't realize the impact, like Joe had said, and Gary said, that these people have on you. And I want to thank them because if it wasn't for people like him and Dee and Riles and, all the other coaches that we've had growing up, and Little League and stuff like that, my father and Mr. Pick and all these guys, Mr. Stevens, that we wouldn't become coaches and we wouldn't become the parents that we are. And like, you don't realize it. You think that they're teaching the game. They're teaching you how to like care for kids and care for others and put them in front of yourself. And that's the biggest thing I think he taught. And hopefully that we all kind of carry it on going forward.
Right. Steve?
Well, I tell them that, I'd basically be telling them that the man that he was a man that I was proud to call my friend. and that they're as John, I wouldn't necessarily say this to them, Mike, but as John used to tell me, he taught me early on with Lou DeFlippo, and I learned a lot from him in high school. Is if you're in a foxhole, who do you want next to you? And if I was in a foxhole and I needed a friend or I needed somebody, George would be one of those people that I'd have in that foxhole with me. And so, I mean, to his family, I would say that you had that thank you, as Joey said, for allowing him, and for that, that if there's another side of him they don't know about, I'd certainly want to tell them about that. Whatever they might want to know, I would certainly tell them. But I just was so saddened to hear the news. I mean, because he was just such a great friend. And, there's not that many guys that you see like that would do that for kids anymore. The coaches that are like that.
Right.
Now it's more about the money. It's all about, somebody wants to coach in the summer because they're getting stuff, not George. He didn't care about that. He only cared about the kids that he was coaching and to their success and how they were going to grow as men. And that's all that matters to him.
Right.
So it's just it's just a big loss. It's just sad, but the memories are there. The memories are what'll sustain us.
Right. And John?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say, besides you and Steve, who I see quite frequently, I'm so proud of these three men right here, what they've grown up and become, the men they've become. And for me to say I had a little piece of that makes me very, very, very happy. And Tules, I'll just say this. He might have had a gruff exterior, but I'll tell you this. He was, take the word gentleman, he was a gentle man. He was a gentle man. He was a kind soul who would give you the shirt off his back and never ask you for anything in return. Thank you for just letting me be a part of this.
Well, guys, I really appreciate this. I know the impact you guys made on him, and I certainly know the impact he made on you. And I really appreciate you giving me a few minutes today. I'd also like to say that Donnie Shepard was supposed to be on today. He was having some computer problems, but he was supposed to be on. George meant a lot to him as a player.
Oh, yeah.
And, it was very important for him to let George's family know what he meant to him. And I just wanted his family to know that because we tried getting Donnie on, but he was just having too many computer problems. So I just wanted to make sure they knew that. But guys, I want to thank you again. It was a real pleasure, and thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Mike.
It was a
Welcome, Thank you very much.
Good to see you
guys.
all.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Have a nice
See you guys. As always.
Thank you, guys.
Nice
And that was
seeing
In the Spotlight, a tribute to Tules for Gary Pompa, John DeFrancisco, Pete Krasnowski, Joey Guyon, and Steve Riley. I'm Mike Kenichi saying good night, everyone.